24 hours after burying her only son, Margaret Holloway was told to pack her bags and leave the home she'd helped nurse him in, by the same woman who stole his final savings and her dignity. But what began as a story of betrayal would become a legacy of grace, justice, and quiet redemption. In a world where cruelty echoes loudly, one grieving mother chose to let love speak louder. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The hum of cicadas filled the warm Georgia air as the sun began its slow descent behind the pines. Margaret Holloway sat on the creaking porch swing of her modest two-bedroom home, a glass of sweet tea in hand and a framed photo of her son, David, resting on her lap. Even now, after all these years, her heart fluttered with a mix of pride and sorrow every time she looked at that photo. David at age 6, missing front teeth and grinning ear to ear in his Spider-Man pajamas. Margaret had never planned to raise a child alone. She and her late husband, Harold, had tried for nearly a decade before she finally became pregnant. David was her miracle, a child she had prayed for on her knees, fasted for, cried over. When Harold died in a car accident just 2 years after David was born, her world shattered. But motherhood anchored her. It became both her burden and her salvation. She worked 2, sometimes 3, jobs while teaching full-time at the local elementary school. Nights were spent grading papers with David curled up beside her, and weekends were filled with garage sales and church potlucks, anything to stretch a dollar. They never had much, but David never went without. He grew up watching his mother labor not just to feed him, but to nurture him, to teach him values like humility, integrity, and compassion. He excelled in school, always quiet, always respectful, but brilliant. A scholarship to Georgia Tech, then a job in Atlanta with a rising software firm. When he called to say he'd met someone, Lena, a financial advisor from a reputable firm, Margaret felt her stomach not just a little. Not because she wasn't happy, but because she wasn't sure if Lena saw David for the gem he was, or for the man he was becoming professionally. Their first meeting was polite. Lena smiled, complimented the peach cobbler, and made the appropriate small talk. But there was something distant in her tone, a calculated poise that made Margaret feel like she was being assessed. Lena never once asked about David's childhood or thanked Margaret for how she'd raised him. Still, David was clearly enamored, and Margaret chose love over judgment. She was there for the engagement, the wedding, the move into their suburban home in northern Atlanta. Though never openly cold, Lena always kept a professional boundary with Margaret, as if her presence was a contract clause that couldn't be broken but also couldn't be enjoyed. Margaret learned to keep her visits short and her opinions to herself. Then came the diagnosis. David had been having headaches, fatigue, occasional memory lapses. It was brain cancer. Aggressive. Stage 4. When he called Margaret that night, his voice cracked. "I don't want to die, Mama." And Margaret's soul cracked with it. Within 2 days, she had packed her things and moved into the guest room at their home to help. Lena initially resisted. She said they could hire help, that the space was tight, but David insisted. "I need my mom," he said. The months that followed were slow torture. She watched her strong, beautiful boy waste away with each round of chemotherapy. His skin paled, his laughter faded, but his spirit, especially when she was near, flickered stubbornly. Margaret cooked every meal from scratch, changed his linens, stayed up during the nights he couldn't sleep. She held his hand during seizures, cried in the shower, and prayed in silence. And still, she tried to smile for him. David never complained. Even in pain, he thanked his mother. "You saved me twice," he whispered one night. "First when I was born, and now again." During those months, Lena grew increasingly distant. She rarely stayed overnight, claiming work obligations, financial meetings, networking dinners. When she did visit, she checked her phone constantly and gave David obligatory kisses on the forehead. Margaret noticed how Lena avoided eye contact, how the love had left her eyes, and how her hugs became increasingly mechanical. One afternoon, Margaret overheard Lena on the phone in the backyard. "Of course I'll have access once he passes. Yes, everything will be in my name. No, the mother doesn't get anything. He already changed the will. He's too out of it to know." Margaret stood at the kitchen sink, dish towel trembling in her hands, her heart cold with dread. She said nothing. Not yet, because her son was still alive. And while he was, she would focus only on him. He passed away on a Thursday morning. Margaret was sitting by his bed, holding his hand, humming the lullaby she used to sing to him as a boy. A single tear rolled down his cheek as he took his final breath. "Sleep now, baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Mama's right here." She stayed there long after the nurses came and went. Long after Lena had stepped outside to make calls. Long after the sun had risen. It would be less than 24 hours before everything else in Margaret's life, her dignity, her future, and the one last promise David had made, would be ripped away. But in that moment, she was just a mother, holding her child. And that love, she thought, was something no one could take. The house was eerily quiet the morning after David died. The machines were gone. The monitors no longer beeped. The hospice nurse had left around 4 a.m., offering her condolences with a respectful nod to Margaret. The sun filtered weakly through the curtains, casting pale light across the living room where Margaret now sat motionless on the couch, David's flannel blanket wrapped tightly around her. She hadn't slept. Couldn't. Her son's scent still lingered in the air, a subtle mix of clean linen and cedarwood. His shoes remained by the front door. The untouched crossword puzzle on the coffee table still had yesterday's date. Thursday, April 10th. He died peacefully, at least. That's what they say, isn't it? As if peace were a balm to the wreckage a parent feels when their child slips beyond the veil. Margaret hadn't cried yet. It was too soon for tears. Grief hadn't settled. It hovered like a heavy fog, waiting to suffocate. In the silence, Margaret replayed his final moments over and over. The way his chest rose once, and then didn't. The last flicker in his eyes. The way his hand relaxed in hers. "Sleep now, baby. Mama's right here," she had whispered. She had meant to stay beside him until the funeral arrangements were made, at least. She didn't expect to be pushed out before the coffee turned cold. Lena emerged from the hallway, freshly showered and dressed in a crisp cream blouse and navy slacks. Her hair was tied neatly into a low bun. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as if today were any other business day. Margaret looked up, bleary-eyed. "I'm going to start calling the funeral home," she said quietly. "David wanted to be cremated. I'll find his paperwork." Lena didn't sit. She placed her phone on the marble countertop, tapped a few keys, then took a slow sip from her latte. Starbucks, Margaret noted, as if her son hadn't just died in that very house. And then, without warning, the ice dropped. "You don't need to worry about that," Lena said flatly. "Everything's being handled. I've already spoken with the funeral home. The will has been updated. Everything's under my authority now." Margaret blinked. "Oh, I see," she said slowly. "Well, if you'd like me to stay a few more days, help with." Lena turned, arms crossed. "No. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Now that David is gone," she said, the words sticking slightly in her throat. "It's time for you to go." Margaret's breath caught. "I'm sorry. I'm asking you politely to pack your things. Today. You were here for David. But he's gone. This is my home now, and I need space to grieve. Alone." The words felt surgical, cutting, precise, emotionless. Margaret sat still, stunned. "But David said I could stay. He told me last month he wanted me to take some time to rest here, to use the guest room as long as I needed." Lena picked up her phone and scrolled nonchalantly. "He changed the will a few weeks ago. Everything goes to me now, the house, the accounts, the life insurance. As his wife, that's what he decided. You were never on the title of the house. And as far as the money goes, well, he trusted me to take care of things." Margaret's voice trembled now. "What about the savings account? The one he opened last year for me? He said it was for when he was gone. 75,000. For my care. Lena looked up, her mouth forming a slight smirk. Oh, that! She let out a single dry laugh. He had it transferred to our joint account. It's mine now. I needed to consolidate everything for legal purposes. And frankly, you don't need that money. You're retired. You have a pension, right? Margaret's heart stopped. David had told her, promised her, that the money was set aside, protected. It's just in case you need anything, he'd said. You spent your life taking care of me. Let me do the same for you. That money had been hope. Security. A way to live the rest of her years with dignity. Now it was gone. She swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Lena, I don't understand. How can you do this? Lena's expression hardened. Because this is my life now. I stood by David while he was dying. I gave up so much of myself for this marriage. And I won't let sentiment get in the way of my future. This house, these assets, they belong to me now. You're not family. Not legally. Not anymore. She turned and walked toward the hallway. I'll call you a ride. You should be out before noon. And just like that, Margaret was dismissed. Margaret moved numbly, packing what little she had. 2 suitcases, a handbag, and a small photo album she'd kept of David as a child. She took a final look around the room where she'd nursed him through cancer. Every wall still echoed with his presence. Every piece of furniture a silent monument to his final days. She left without saying another word. Not because she didn't have anything to say, but because anything worth saying had been buried with her son the day before. She stood on the sidewalk as a rideshare car pulled up. The sky above was darkening with a late spring storm, and as she stepped into the back seat, the first drops of rain began to fall. The driver, a young man in his 20s, glanced at her through the mirror. You okay, ma'am? Margaret looked out the window, clutching the photo album to her chest. No, she whispered, but I will be. And the car pulled away, leaving behind the home where a son died and where the truth about love and betrayal was only just beginning to unravel. 6 weeks later, Margaret Holloway stood at the gates of Evelyn Grace Women's Ministry Shelter, a modest white brick building tucked behind an aging Baptist church in downtown Augusta. The sign was slightly crooked, the hedges overgrown, but the place radiated a quiet kind of dignity. She hadn't told anyone where she was going, not even the neighbors she'd known for decades. What was there to say? My son died and his wife took everything. I'm 63, homeless, and living off Social Security that barely covers groceries. Instead, Margaret simply vanished from the life she had known. A life that once revolved around Sunday school classes, flower arranging for church services, and warm potlucks with friends. None of that seemed real anymore. Not since the day she left Atlanta with nothing but a suitcase, a handbag, and her son's photo album clutched to her chest. The first few nights at the shelter were hard. Her room was small, just a twin bed, a desk, and a thin blanket, but it was clean. At night, muffled cries echoed through the halls from other women seeking refuge. From abusive husbands, addiction, broken families. Margaret didn't cry. Not because the pain wasn't there, it was. But because her grief had become so embedded it no longer needed expression. It simply lived inside her, quiet and constant. Each morning, she woke early and volunteered in the kitchen. Cooking was second nature, and it brought her a strange kind of peace. She taught some of the younger women how to season food without measurements and how to bake biscuits by feel, not recipe. They called her Miss Margaret, and she became a maternal figure in the shelter. They didn't know her whole story, but they respected her. She never complained, never pitted herself. She simply kept going. One afternoon, while tutoring a young mother studying for her GED, a familiar voice interrupted her quiet focus. Miss Holloway? She turned, startled. A tall woman in a tailored blazer stood in the doorway, her black curls pulled into a bun, a large leather bag over her shoulder. Her eyes lit up. You may not remember me. I was in your 4th grade class. Ashley Monroe. Margaret blinked. Ashley Monroe. A memory surfaced, an eager, bright girl who always stayed late to help clean up markers and sharpen pencils. That's me, Ashley laughed, now clearly in her 30s. I heard through the grapevine you were here. I work at Monroe and Blake Law now. I couldn't believe it. I had to see you. Margaret stood up slowly, suddenly self-conscious in her worn-out sweater and faded jeans. Ashley's face softened. What happened to you, Miss Holloway? Margaret hesitated. Then, with trembling hands, she told her everything. The cancer. The slow, brutal goodbye. Lena's eviction. The vanished savings. The house. Ashley didn't interrupt. She listened with the reverence of someone who had been shaped by this woman. When Margaret finished, Ashley's voice was firm. I want to help you. Pro bono. No charge. That woman, Lena, what she did isn't just cruel. It may be illegal. If your son promised you money and there's documentation, we might be able to build a case. At the very least, we can pressure her to return what's rightfully yours. Margaret hesitated. I don't want revenge. Ashley nodded. This isn't revenge. It's restoration. 2 weeks later, Ashley uncovered something unexpected. David had a safety deposit box registered in his name, independent of the joint accounts Lena managed. Inside was a sealed envelope, his will's original draft, and a single-page handwritten letter addressed to Mom. Ashley placed it gently in Margaret's hands. Dear Mama, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I wish I could have protected you more. I wanted to leave you everything I could, but Lena and I were fighting a lot during my treatments. She insisted on controlling the finances for simplicity. I was too tired to argue. I hope she honors what I asked. The savings was meant for you. I wanted you to rest, to live. I love you more than life itself. You're the reason I became a man who could fight this hard. I'm sorry if I failed you in the end. David. Margaret wept. But this time, it wasn't just for loss. It was for truth. For the quiet affirmation that her son's love had never been a lie, even if his wife's promises had been. Ashley acted quickly. The letter, while not legally binding, was compelling evidence. Combined with bank records, witness testimony, and David's former financial planner, who confirmed he had tried to revise the account but was overridden, Ashley filed a civil claim against Lena for misappropriation of funds and emotional damages. But Lena didn't respond to the first 2 letters. Or the third. Because Lena had problems of her own now. Back at the shelter, Margaret found peace in rhythm. Mornings in the garden. Afternoons teaching reading to struggling women. Nights spent reading scriptures and watching the sky turn from gold to purple. People at the shelter admired her. They didn't know all the details, but they knew resilience when they saw it. Miss Margaret, one young mother whispered one evening, you're like a candle. Even in the dark, you still burn. Margaret smiled gently, brushing a strand of gray hair from her face. No, baby, she said. I'm just holding on to the light my son left me. And though she still went to bed alone, in a narrow bed far from the life she once knew, Margaret no longer felt broken. She was building something again, brick by brick. And far away, karma was quietly placing its final pieces. 18 months later. From the outside, Lena Holloway appeared to be thriving. Her social media was immaculate, a carefully curated gallery of curated luxury. She smiled in every photo, wine glass in hand, designer heels clicking across marble floors. There were pictures from Paris in the spring, rooftop dinners in Manhattan, a diamond tennis bracelet glinting in Dubai sunlight. She had remarried, too, quickly. Marcus DeWitt, a wealthy entrepreneur 15 years her senior with a portfolio of tech startups and angel investments. Tall, silver-haired, charming. He wore tailored suits even to brunch and called her my greatest asset. They were a power couple, or so it seemed. What no one saw were the cracks, thin at first, then wide enough to fall through. Lena had used David's life insurance payout, just under $500,000, to bankroll Marcus's latest venture, a blockchain-based logistics company. He spoke in polished jargon and bold projections. Quarterly returns, private equity expansion, IPO in under 2 years. She was dazzled. She gave him full access to the joint investment account. He took control of the paperwork, the tax filings, even the property deed to the house David had once lived in. Simplify everything, he said. You trust me, don't you? Lena, still drunk on the euphoria of wealth and reinvention, handed over the keys to her kingdom. Within months, everything collapsed. It began with a federal investigation into the startup. Words like fraud, embezzlement, and Ponzi structure began appearing in emails. One morning, Lena woke to find Marcus gone. His suits, his watches, his laptop, all vanished. Her accounts? Empty. The house? Tied up in litigation. Marcus had forged a second mortgage and defaulted on it. Lena's credit was ruined. Her name, once respected in Atlanta's finance circle, was now synonymous with reckless mismanagement and scandal. Her firm placed her on indefinite leave, pending reputational review. She tried calling Marcus's number. Disconnected. She filed a police report. Nothing came of it. Then came the lawsuits. Creditors. Former clients. Her name appeared in headlines, not as a power player, but as a cautionary tale. Her friends stopped answering her texts. Even the ones she'd vacationed with in Italy the summer before ghosted her. She began drinking in the evenings, first as a comfort, then as a routine. Bottles of white wine gave way to cheaper vodka. Her perfect skin dulled. Her weight dropped. Her smile became forced and brittle. Then, one morning, the sheriff came to the door. The house, the one she forced Margaret to leave, was being repossessed. She had 30 days to vacate. 3 months later, the Evelyn Grace shelter buzzed with activity as volunteers served their Sunday meal to the city's growing homeless population. Margaret stood at the center of it all, her apron dusted with flour, a warm sweet potato casserole in her gloved hands. Her gray hair was pulled back, her cheeks full of life again. She'd moved out of the shelter months ago into a small church-funded cottage nearby. Simple, cozy hers. With Ashley Monroe's legal help and funds raised through a viral article about her story, Margaret had launched the David Holloway Scholarship Fund, giving underprivileged students, especially those with single mothers, a chance at college. The article had circulated online like wildfire. Mother of betrayed cancer patient turns tragedy into hope. Thousands donated. Churches wrote letters. Even a few old students sent checks and handwritten notes. You taught me more than math, Miss Holloway. You taught me strength. One afternoon, while preparing lunch at the shelter, a volunteer tapped Margaret on the shoulder. There's someone new in intake today. She asked for a plate. She didn't give her name. But I think you should see her. Margaret turned slowly. There, slumped in the corner of the entryway, was a woman in a threadbare coat and scuffed heels. Her eyes were hollow. Her once perfect hair hung in limp strands. Her makeup, what little remained, was smudged. It was Lena. She looked up, and for the first time in 2 years, their eyes met. Margaret didn't speak. She simply walked back to the kitchen, ladled out a warm portion of casserole, and returned to where Lena sat. She knelt, gently setting the tray on the bench beside her. Lena's lips trembled. I didn't know where else to go. Margaret nodded. You came to the right place. Tears streamed down Lena's cheeks. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Margaret's voice was steady but kind. We all make choices, and those choices make us. Lena looked down, ashamed. I lost everything. Margaret stood. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find who you really are. She walked away, her footsteps soft, her heart not hardened but whole. That night, Lena didn't sleep. Not just because of the cot or the noise, but because the weight of what she had done had finally fully arrived. Not as punishment, but as truth. The woman she had pushed out of her home now fed her. The love she once dismissed had not turned vengeful. It had become a foundation for others to stand on. Lena wept silently, not from hunger, but from the ache of a heart that finally understood the cost of greed. 1 year later, the sun rose over the David Holloway Learning Center, a newly built wing of the local community college, funded by donations from across the country. On the front lawn stood a bronze plaque engraved with the words, "In memory of David Holloway, beloved son, devoted soul, eternal light. A life lost too soon, but never forgotten. Dozens of students bustled in and out of the building, clutching books, laughing, planning futures they now had access to. Futures funded in part by the David Holloway Scholarship, which had grown from a humble idea to a thriving nonprofit, thanks to the persistence of a mother who had lost everything and refused to let the loss define her. Inside the administrative office, Margaret sat with Ashley Monroe, now her close friend and executive partner in the foundation. Margaret wore a sky-blue blouse and modest pearls, her silver hair neatly curled. Her presence, once dimmed by grief, radiated quiet wisdom. She looked over a letter from a student who had just received a full scholarship. Dear Miss Margaret, my name is Tasha, and I was accepted into the nursing program. My mom raised me alone after my dad left. She works 2 jobs and still makes me dinner every night. I want to help people the way you helped me, without even knowing me. Thank you. You gave me my future. Asterisk. Margaret's eyes misted, but her smile was gentle. I think David would have liked her, she whispered. Ashley nodded. He would have been proud of you. Margaret paused, staring out the window where young people, full of dreams, walked freely under the Georgia sun. I feel him everywhere, she said. Sometimes in the quiet, sometimes in the wind. He's in the good I try to do. That's how I keep him alive. That afternoon, she returned to the Evelyn Grace shelter to volunteer, as she always did on Fridays. The kitchen smelled of rosemary chicken and fresh bread. Laughter echoed in the hallways. Music played softly from a radio near the dining area. Margaret moved with ease, humming as she ladled food onto plates. In the far corner, Lena sat silently alone. She'd been at the shelter for months now, no longer the elegant, icy woman who once stood above Margaret, but a shadow softened by time. She had stopped wearing makeup. She now volunteered cleaning bathrooms, folding laundry, helping with inventory. She didn't ask for special treatment. She didn't expect forgiveness. She never apologized again after that day Margaret fed her. She didn't need to. Her actions had become her apology. Margaret didn't speak to her often, but she watched. She saw the small changes, the humility, the cracks where light was slowly seeping back in. That afternoon, Lena left a folded note on the church kitchen counter. No envelope. No dramatics. Just paper and ink. Margaret found it at the end of the day. She unfolded it slowly. Miss Margaret, I don't expect redemption. I don't deserve it. I stole more than money. I stole time. I stole peace. You gave me food when I had given you cruelty. You gave me grace when I had earned nothing. I can never undo what I did. But I can try to live differently now. Quietly. Honestly. Maybe even purposefully. I'm sorry. Truly. Lena asterisk. Margaret stared at the note for a long time. Then, wordlessly, she folded it and slipped it into the same pocket where she kept David's last letter. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just closed her eyes and listened to the silence. Not the silence of loss or anger or abandonment, but the silence of healing, of something slowly coming full circle. Years passed. The David Holloway Foundation continued to grow, offering scholarships, grief support groups, and financial literacy workshops for single mothers and caregivers. Margaret never remarried, never moved far, and never stopped volunteering. Lena eventually moved out of the shelter and began working at a recovery home for women. She never again sought attention. She worked in the background, quiet and committed. Their paths crossed sometimes, at events, at donation drives, at quiet Sunday services. They didn't exchange long conversations. But sometimes their eyes met with mutual acknowledgement, not of the past, but of the grace that followed. Asterisk, pain doesn't break the good. It refines it. What you do with pain, that's where karma watches. Asterisk, and in the echo of silence, where the world once ended for a grieving mother, something new began, rooted in sorrow, but blooming in forgiveness. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.